Graphic design, commercial art, the intent to inform and persuade. In the beginning, we had signs and symbols. Marks made by humans can be dated back as far as 200,000 years ago in Africa. This first picture is from Lascaux in France. It dates back to about 15,000 to 10,000 before Common Era. Some drawings have dots, squares, and other abstract figures. No one knows exactly what they mean. Our second picture is a Native American cave drawing. These drawings are called pictographs, which are symbols that represent ideas or concepts. Graphic design uses words and symbols to create a specific message, one that should be correctly interpreted by the viewer. Guess what some of the earliest writings were? Clay tags to identify what goods were in bags and pottery. It was package identification. Other uses were for record keeping, like who paid their taxes, how much grain was being stored. This particular tablet is from the city of Uruk and it lists goods. The wet clay would have been held in your hand and the symbols carved in with a reed stylus. The writing was in vertical columns. Cylinder seals were created to show identification. These carved cylinders could be rolled across a tablet to prove who created it. They often had holes in them so they could be worn. And because they made the same design over and over again, these are considered the precursor to the printing press. These seals are the earliest form of a trademark. Our earliest books were hand drawn, mostly done on scraped hides. Illuminated manuscripts were called illuminated because they used gold for accents, and the light reflected off of them made them look like they had lights on them. Now remember, each one of these needed to be created individually, and so there were never two that were identical. Meanwhile, paper making and woodblock printing, which started in China, made its way to the Mideast and then eventually to Europe. Sicily started making paper in 1102 Common Era. Italy had its first paper mill by 1276, and France followed in 1348. One of the earliest uses of block printing was to make playing cards. The decks of cards represented different citizens. There were hearts, which represented the clergy. Spades or swords were the nobility. Clubs was the peasantry. And diamonds were the burghers or middle class merchants. Woodblock picture books were made to bring religious instruction to people who couldn't read. This one is called an Ars Moriendi. It's a piece of church propaganda instructing people in the art of dying, asking them to donate their estates to the church. Early books were printed by hand, with a person applying ink to the block of carved wood and then hand rubbing the paper onto the block. The press allowed for inked wood blocks to be pressed down onto the paper. Remember, blocks were carved, which is a time consuming process, backwards, and then printed. And one carving could only last so long because repeatedly pushing that down against a paper would break the wood. Tradition says that Gutenberg dropped a carved block and broke it into tiny pieces, and that gave him the principles for creating movable type. With the invention of movable type came all of the different typeface designs. In the 1700s, Bodoni designed around 300 different typefaces. After you printed your pages, you had to, of course, have someone tear the tray down and sort the type back out again. Did you ever hear of minding your P's and Q's? Well, there's different stories about that saying, but my favorite is that it's created from sorting type, because what could be more difficult than picking P's and Q's out and putting them in the proper place? If you were a printer, you did have to buy your type. And if you needed multiples of a single letter and you didn't have any more in your set that you bought, you'd end up mixing your typeface. Gaudi, Garamond, Baskerville, and Caslin are some of the early typefaces that you are probably familiar with and we still use today. These are wonderful examples of typefaces that are mixed. How many different ones can you find? We're moving to packaging and posters, which are promotional pieces. Lithography is a Greek word. It literally means stone printing. It was invented in 1796 by the Bavarian Alois Senefelder. It is based on the idea that oil and water will not mix. Basically, you draw a design on a flat stone with an oil-based crayon or pencil. The water is then spread over the stone, and it doesn't stick to the oil, so that part will stay dry. Then an oil-based ink is applied, which sticks to the design but not onto the water. Then the image is transferred to the paper. Later, the stones were replaced with a metal plate. Chromolithography or color lithography added the color and printing became easier. Each color, though, requires a separate stone or plate. Prang from the Al Prang Company used as many as 40 different stones for a single design, just so that he could get the colors he wanted. Now remember, this has to be redrawn on stone 40 different times and maintain perfect copy all the way across. Offset printing allowed the transfer onto items like metal tins. Posters became very popular due to a change in the laws in France, which then allowed posters to be placed almost anywhere. And of course, lots of books. They could be created in color. Advances in printing techniques made it possible for multiple copies to be printed, and designers could then concentrate on the presentation of the pages. These are works by Randolph Caldecott, which is on the left. The center is an example of a book by Kate Greenaway. And on the right, Bruce Rogers. Rogers was a typographer as well as a designer. And this used one of his typefaces. This was a book written by Maurice de Guerin. Design is a decision-making process. It is the culmination of subtle choices that are made about the kind of paper, the type. What about the margins, the space around the print, the leading between the lines? And there's much more that creates a unity in the final presentation. Our textbooks are designed for legibility. The typeface reflects the content of the book, and the paper is chosen specifically so the images will print brightly. Ebooks are designed for legibility while still trying to maintain the look and feel of the printed book. And then posters, lots and lots of posters. These examples are a series of posters that were done for the railroads. They were created by Joseph Binder. He was born in Austria, and so he pulled from the European style to create these posters in the US. You should look at the London Underground posters. Go to julessherratt.org and view the slideshow. Jules Sherratt is referred to as the father of the modern poster. He was a lithographer. Toulouse-Lautrec is another great source. And if you'd like to look at some World War I propaganda, you can visit firstworldwar.com/posters. And if you'd like to look at some Nazi propaganda from World War II, inprint.printmag.com has a source for those. There are also some wonderful posters that were created by Andy Warhol and Gustav Klutzis. That's Klutsis. And another one to look at is the Metropolis poster. These are some great examples of design for magazine covers. This is from the Harper's Weekly, which became the Harper's Bazaar. The large image on the left is from the Civil War, while the other ones are examples from the 1920s. Next, a look at environmental visual systems, items that we find placed around us. These are the symbols that were created by the U.S. Department of Transportation. We're very used to seeing them. We look at those almost everywhere every day. But these were created in the 1970s, and when they first came out, they were considered radical. People were very upset that we were adopting something that did not use the English language. And so there was quite an uproar. We take these symbols for granted now. These are symbols that were created for the Olympics. On the right are the symbols that were created for the 1972 Olympics, so that people from around the world would be able to identify and locate the events. The images that are on the left are from 2008. Notice how stylized these have become in comparison to the other graphics. Graphic designers create logos and the branding for companies. Sometimes these change over the years, and designers update the corporate image. You can see how IBM has evolved over the years, and I think I'm incorrect on this being to the present. I believe they've updated it again, but you can see the change from looking like a globe to the current design. MTV has undergone a multitude of changes throughout the years. And pay close attention to the Aunt Jemima logo across the bottom of the screen. If we were to use the original logo on the left now, this would be a very offensive logo. As you can see, sometimes it's necessary to make changes and update logos to keep an item current. And then we'll move to movies and special effects, titles, and animations. Designers work with both big and small screen. We can create special effects for film with companies like Industrial Light and Magic. Film and television titles, the lead-ins, the credits, advertising certainly, websites, cell phone apps, and so much more. Programs like Quark and Adobe InDesign give us page layout to create books and magazines. Dreamweaver and a multitude of other programs help create web pages. Photoshop, After Effects, these all make animations. And of course, the 3D programs like Maya. Graphic designers can work with all of these, and each one by itself can become a specialty. As you can see, graphic design has a very long history. The field really bloomed during the 1920s, and it's exploded since then. With the addition of the computer, many more people have entered the field. But always remember, the roots of graphic design are in fine art, and above all else, design matters.